Welcome to the Take Action Podcast, where we empower communication partners to feel confident with AAC. I am Lauren Greenleaf, a certified speech-language pathologist with nearly a decade of experience in AAC. Join us weekly as we dive into all of the aspects of AAC and hear from communication partners just like you who are successfully integrating AAC into their daily lives. Whether you are an SLP, a parent, an educator, or any other communication partner, you are absolutely in the right place if you are ready to take actionable steps towards AAC success today. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Take Action Podcast. This week, I am here with Nikki, who is an SLP in New Jersey. Nikki, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. Nikki and I have a little history chatting with each other, so I'm really excited to have you on the show. We are going to talk about floor time and implementing AAC within floor time. So it's going to be a really exciting conversation. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey with AAC?
So I am in New Jersey, and I've been an SLP for just about over 7 years. I actually was the girl in grad school that was like, I'm not going to work with kids. Like, I only want a CF in the medical field. Like, I don't care about these peds courses. And it was ironic because I was actually pregnant in grad school. So I was pregnant saying like, I don't even want to work with kids. Like, I want to be a medical CF.
That's awesome.
So my career actually started out in the subacute setting. And I stayed there for a couple years. COVID hit, and that's when everything changed for me. All of my long-term patients unfortunately passed away, and it was very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, you know what? Like, let me see how I feel about switching to the schools. So yay.
Big switch.
Yeah, big switch. But I honestly, like, when I stepped back into the schools, I just felt like, oh my gosh, like, why haven't I been doing this? I loved working with the kids again. I started out as a subcontractor, so I was kind of just like filling in a lot of like leave replacements, maternity leave. So that was great because I was in preschools, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. So I had so much experience. And within that, again, like, I rediscovered my love for AAC. You know, in grad school, I had a placement primarily working with children and adults with cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And so I had a lot of exposure to AAC in that one placement. And then, you know, and even when I worked in subacute, I had some aphasic patients that I would get like Wingrafka devices for.
Yeah.
But that was really kind of the extent of it. So then when I went back into the schools, that's when I was like, oh, okay, like, this child could benefit from a device, and this child, and this child. And I just like fell in love with AAC all over again. And in 2023, I was still working in the school, but that's when I also started my private practice on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2024, this year was when I left the schools completely to just focus on my private practice. So that's been really exciting. So now a lot of my caseload is gestalt language and AAC. So I love it.
That's so awesome. I love hearing these types of journeys because I was that kid in grad school that was like, I will do kids and I will only do kids. Please don't give me the adult medical placements.
Yeah.
I don't want them. I don't want them.
Yeah. So that's like the beauty of our field too. It's just like, I feel like as long as you can keep switching it up, that really helps with preventing burnout. So it's awesome.
Absolutely. And I think that has been the key for me when I started my private practice. It gave me a new look on certain things. Like, I was in the school systems for so long and I was getting burnout with certain components and barriers that were in place within a school system. And now I can watch all of those barriers from the outside and help my families advocate to break them.
Yeah. Yeah. We can definitely talk about barriers because I've run into a few things recently.
Yes. We will definitely circle back to some barriers because there are plenty of them for sure. So let's start with our floor time discussion.
Yeah.
Can you tell everybody who doesn't know what is floor time, or what does floor time look like?
Absolutely. So the full name is actually DIRFloortime. So we can break that down. So the D stands for developmental. It's based on the principles of human development. The I stands for individual differences. So it really, really looks at a child's individual differences, which we can also talk about more.
Mm-hmm.
And then the R is relationship based. So it really, really emphasizes that connection, that relationship that you have with a child. And floor time, honestly, it's kind of misleading because it doesn't mean like we're playing on the floor.
Yeah.
It is a program, but it is also a framework. So the actual program recommends like 4 to 8 increments of 4 to 8 times a day for like 20 minutes.
Okay.
But like, obviously that's so unrealistic for, most families.
Yeah.
So it really can be just thought of as like a framework that you can implement, whether you're a speech therapist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a psychologist, even a parent.
Yeah.
When I took the floor time, like the basic floor time course, my cohort had all different kinds of therapists from all over the world and some parents that were just like, hey, I want to learn about how to do this with my own kid.
I love that because I feel like that so encompasses all of the buzzwords that are currently out in our field right now of connection and child-led and
yes,
that supportive role of really meeting that kid where they're at.
Yeah.
And DIR floor time seems to really encompass that already.
Yeah, for sure. So that was my kind of like going into the course. I was kind of like, I feel like I already like know all of this information. You know what I mean? Like which was the wrong mindset to have because like obviously I'm always open to like learning and like I knew I was going to learn.
Yeah.
But I also, part of me felt like, but I already, pretty much apply this framework, even though I don't have like any sort of certificate yet. Like this is my approach. And I feel like that already aligns with how so many therapists act within, their.
Yeah. And I think that's been a conversation I've been having a lot lately, especially with the neurodiversity-affirming movement and all this gestalt language processing stuff coming out.
Yeah.
So much of good therapy with neurodivergent individuals is really that child-led, individual-based therapy.
Exactly.
We may not all have always been doing that, but some of us have been doing that for a really long time. It's just how we did learn it. So I like that we're all kind of getting to the point where we really honor that and respect that.
Yeah, definitely.
So when it comes to this DIR floor time model, how does AAC fit into it for you? Does it look any different or what's it look like?
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. So does it look any different? I would say no, but learning about that I piece really helped me realize like why certain things work for one child or why certain things may not work for one child, right? So for example, I'm just thinking about my caseload. I have one child who he had a robust high-tech device and he had been doing really, really well with it. But one of his individual differences was that auditory information could be like very dysregulating for him. So he would explore on the device and it would get him almost like hyper aroused because it like the auditory stimuli was just like so exciting for him.
Okay.
So it actually, he by himself would just gravitate more naturally towards his light tech binder. He has all of the pages printed out.
Okay.
And he's much more efficient with using that.
Okay.
And when I'm again looking at his eye, that makes sense because he also has a preference for tactile input. He always has like a rubber band in his hand. So when he's flipping through the pages of that binder, he's getting that tactile input. So that supports his regulation. And because there's none of that like auditory feedback that's potentially dysregulating to him, the light tech binder just works. So like he still has access to the high tech, of course.
Yeah.
But like his parents and I even talked to his school-based SLP, we're like, listen, he's communicating effectively with this light tech binder. So like, we're just gonna have him keep doing what he's doing.
I love that example because you frequently see that question, like, but when don't we do high tech, or how would we know if high tech wouldn't work? And those are two very distinct features of that individual in his system that benefit from more of a light tech system. And what I think is key about what you shared is that it wasn't a light tech system that's limited. He still has access to everything.
Exactly. They're all printed out in a binder and he's so quick with just boop, 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 boop. Like when he's flipping through the binder, it's amazing. It's so amazing.
I love it. And that's it. Like if kids prefer something, we got to roll with it, right?
Yeah.
Like just because we say high tech tends to provide more robust access doesn't actually mean it does for everybody. If it's going to dysregulate him enough that he can't access his language as well as a light tech system, then a light tech system is perfect for him.
Yeah. So I actually think it's been really helpful for me to just literally write out all of the individual differences for a lot of my clients.
Okay.
So the individual differences that we take into consideration for all clients, not just clients that we're potentially using AAC with. Obviously, communication and language, their auditory preferences, their sensory processing and integration, so like their reactivity to certain stimuli.
Yeah.
Their motor planning and praxis, and the visual spatial, which is also like a huge difference that before I took the floor time course, I didn't pay attention to as much. But after, learning more about that, it like certain things just clicked with some of my clients as well.
Yeah. And I would imagine the visuospatial piece impacts a lot of the customization that you do, the grid size that you use, the colors, those types of situations.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
So at the end of every episode, I have a resource library that you can get access to. And the link is always in the show notes, but that will totally be our handout for today, is looking at those individual differences. That's perfect.
Oh, cool. Yeah, awesome.
That worked out nicely. So aside from looking at those individual differences, are you really just kind of incorporating AAC within the activities that you're planning for the day, modeling kind of without expectation and picking new vocabulary?
Yeah. So, we look at the individual differences to help us determine like why a device may or may not work for a child, but also what the floor time community, again, I like that you mentioned buzzwords, because another buzzword is coming up. In the floor time community, you'll hear this word a lot, and the word is affect.
Okay.
Which is how we express any of our emotions, our feelings. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through oral speech, obviously, right? So affect could just mean like the way a child moves towards you or away from you, a small gesture that they use, maybe like an eye gaze or an eye shift, a facial expression. And floor time really, really emphasizes like paying attention to a child's affect, and also like the way that we're presenting our affect.
Okay.
So you can have so many back and forth interactions through affects alone. It doesn't necessarily have to be like with the AAC device. And it's also a good reminder that like using those gestures, those facial expressions, right? Like that is also a form of AAC.
Yep.
I feel like sometimes now when I hear the word AAC, I immediately picture like an iPad in my head.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, wait, no, AAC is also just like gestures and texting. So it's a good reminder that we really have to emphasize that multimodal approach and honor all forms of communication.
Yeah, I like that. And I clearly need to go get my DIR floor time certificate. So much of this is stuff that I talk about on a regular basis with clients and things like that. But it's in my observational framework versus like an actual like the DIR framework. Like you said, it's all stuff we've kind of been doing, or some of us do. But there's some research and some setting framework to it. Like it's a little more formal than just doing.
Exactly. So recently, like since I've taken my floor time course too, like I've been paying more attention to just my affect with my clients. And I'm trying to find that balance of like, okay, like they have a high-tech AAC device now. I want to make sure that I'm modeling without expectation. I want to make sure that they're getting, that aided language input from me modeling. But I also don't want to like stress out about like, I have this hour-long session and I need to be modeling for the entire 60 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's just something that I'm working on, is like, okay, like it's okay if, we're running outside and I don't have to necessarily stress out about like getting the device wet or the device dirty, because I am still working on strengthening that R piece. And I'm also focusing on like the affect that the child and I are using like and still working on those back and forth interactions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It almost takes the pressure off of some of the things we build up a lot of pressure around in regards to AAC, that like overwhelm of I have to do it all the time.
Yes.
Perfectly.
Yes.
But you're very much taking it back a step and saying, it's okay if I'm not perfect at it, because even when I'm not, I'm still working on developing that relationship and working on that affect and that like that nonverbal communication piece with the kids.
So, that could look like just playing peekaboo with a child and trying to get as many back and forth interactions as you can that way, or blowing bubbles with a child. Like, is there joint attention? Can we pop the bubbles back and forth? Like, how are they telling me with their affect that like they like this activity and they want more? It doesn't, I don't necessarily have to have the device out at all times, like bubbles more, because, and this is another thing that the floor time community emphasizes, which I really, really like as a private practitioner. They really focus on reflective feedback, like watching your own videos and like critiquing yourself. Because when you take the floor time course, that's what you and your classmates do. You watch each other's videos and provide feedback. And it's such a wonderful learning experience. Now, when I go back and watch my own videos, I'm realizing, and I hope I'm not the only one that has ever done this, like there have been times where like I'm spending too long like looking for a certain word on a device.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I really want to model like that one like fringe vocab word. Like, where is it? So I'm looking down at the device, and then I'm realizing that I'm missing some affect that the child is giving me.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find a balance of like, I want to model on the device, but I also really want to focus on still strengthening like all of these, pre-verbal, like non-linguistic skills.
Yeah. It's such an important conversation. You are definitely not alone. I have spent way too much time trying to find words sometime. And I always tell people that's okay in moderation. But if you're doing that every single time you're looking for a word, like then it's time to kind of reevaluate the situation and try to learn before you go into a session.
Yeah. So I would look back at the video and I noticed like, oh, like as I was looking for the word, the child like gestured towards me that like he wanted something else,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I can really respect that reflexive piece though, because I think that's what makes us as human beings in general, like I'm not even going to say just professionals, because parents also so much better at supporting our kids. Like I just think of my mom moments and I'm like, ooh, I could have handled that differently and it would have went a lot better.
Oh, every day, every single day that happens.
Yes. And it happens in every speech session too. And I think this is a really important conversation because people need to know that it happens for all of us all the time. It's not just you that's having a hard time doing things. We're all reflecting and saying, oh, that wasn't our best session. Let's try again next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really like this floor time model, and I really appreciate the idea that AAC should be around and available. We always say like within reach. It's there, but it doesn't have to necessarily always be I touch it every single time I say a word.
Right.
Especially, I think, too, this kind of plays in a lot with our really early AAC users. I'm thinking like the ones where we're like, you're interested in the device, but I can't tell if you're interested in the device.
Yeah.
And we're working really hard on that. Or the team is saying like, oh, they're just stimming on it. Now we can kind of go in with that other layer of, okay, yes, we're going to keep working on the AAC device, but let's also build up these skills because that's going to help the communication.
Yes, we still have to, think about the ladder, right? So that D part of DIR stands for that developmental hierarchy of, okay, like the child needs to be regulated, attentive, and then we work on like any back and forth interaction, and then we try to see if we can get them into like complex problem solving. And I like to think about it as a ladder because we go up and down, right? Like a child may primarily be in one developmental capacity, but then something triggers them, they're dysregulated, and they're back down to that bottom of the ladder.
Yeah.
Just like as adults too. We can fluctuate up and down the ladder throughout our day depending on, what's going on or how we're feeling.
Yeah. And that's a really important conversation too, because we're not always on. We're not always on. Our kids are not always on. And we have to be able to move up and down that ladder. And when I hear you say the latter too, and kind of put those things on the rungs, I notice that there's a lot of that executive functioning piece at the bottom.
Yes.
And making sure those pieces are built and strong is another key component.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes we might have to take a step back and say, and look at the child's individual differences and say like, okay, like, how can I get this child regulated? Like, what is it that they're seeking? What is it that they're not seeking? What do they need in order to get regulated, in order to get that attention before we can really say like, let's target these language goals.
Yeah. And I know you've done some executive functioning training too. We've talked about it a few times, but that attention and perception piece, just at that base of like, we need to have those two pieces in place for the language to really sink in and stay and be useful.
Yes.
And sometimes that's where we have to start with kids, and that's okay.
Yeah, I feel that I have to, constantly kind of explain that to parents, which is obviously totally fine.
Yeah.
But, parents will come to me thinking that I'm just going to like kind of jump into like the middle of the ladder, so to speak, of like, okay, my child's not talking. I want you to get my child talking. And I'm like, okay, yes, of course. But like before we can even really, target words, so to speak, like I have to like tell you about like regulation and attention and like all of these other things that I'm noticing that will really, help us get to where you want to be.
And it seems like with this whole conversation, if I'm like summarizing everything that we've already said, essentially AAC is wonderful and we should be using it with all of these clients that need it and need support from it. But sometimes we have to think down at the bottom of the ladder where we build the regulation and we build the attention and we build the affect and the intent to even attempt a communication while also providing language. We're not waiting for those things to occur.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm not waiting. I recently just got devices for 2-year-olds. Yeah. So it's not like you have to do this first before we can recommend a device. Like we can work on all of these skills in conjunction.
Yeah. And balancing that is probably the harder part, but
I agree.
I would guess too also though, like following your gut. I think that's your clinical judgment, your parent gut.
Yeah.
It's a really official term for our podcast today.
Parent gut. I love it.
Your parent gut. But you, as a parent specifically, and as a clinician that starts to get to know your client, those individual differences. You start to learn those individual differences, and then you can adapt how you're supporting the AAC and how you're supporting the affect and how you're supporting that attention and that regulation from knowing all that. And it doesn't have to be set. It can change. I'm sure this has happened to you. I have plenty of clients that come and they're like, trampoline is the most regulating thing possible. And then like 3 weeks later, the trampoline does nothing for us and we're on to something else.
Yeah, that's totally true.
So keeping that flexibility to how we're approaching it. And it really seems like that DIR floor time piece gives you that backdrop of how to kind of do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you have any cool success stories you could share with us?
So yeah, this is like, I would say a success story in progress.
Okay. I'll take a success story in progress.
Yeah. A success story in progress. And also one of those moments where I was like, why didn't I introduce AAC sooner? So I've been working for this client for about a year. He's 5 years old. Gestalt language processor, earlier stages. He's verbal though. So, because he's verbal, like he wasn't someone that I met and was like, oh, okay, like right off the bat, like I'm going to get him an AAC device.
Yeah.
But then after a little bit of like working with him, I realized that one of his individual differences was that he had a strong preference for visual information. Like it was really regulating for him to like watch, train pieces move back and forth. He would sometimes like hold things very close to his eye and kind of examine them. And, when I realized that like he had this individual difference, I started to trial some AAC devices with him.
Yeah.
Just on my personal iPad, I just started having like, a couple apps like in the background, like I was modeling on them here and there. And he took to it so fast, Lauren. Like, I can't even tell you, like, within like a day, he was just looking at the icons and like using them like functionally. Like, he was saying help, he was saying eat, and I was kind of like, oh, I was kicking myself of like,
Yeah.
why didn't I, put this together sooner? And it was also just another great reminder of like, yeah, like he can be a really effective, like part-time AAC user. Like, yes, he is communicating with me verbally, but also like because of this eye of his individual difference of like a strong preference for visual information, like it makes so much sense that he took to AAC as quickly as he did. So I would say it's a success story because I eventually got there and was like, oh, let me just do this. But I also was kind of mad at myself for not just implementing it right off the bat, I will say.
Yeah. But you know what? I think that's really reasonable. I have had plenty of times where that's happened. Or even I've thought something like, oh, we got to start them on this grid size. And then they blew me away instantly. And you were like, oh, okay, well, that was bad of me to not presume you could do more. And
yes.
I think that's just part of being an SLP and even being a parent and trying to navigate what we already know to be true without actually physically like being in these kids' heads.
Yeah.
I know it sounds so weird when you say it like that, but I can't always know what's going on. And that makes so much sense to me, though, that he really was attracted to the visual information. And that's what a high-tech AAC system is. It's a visual representation of language. And
yes,
what an awesome support. There's been lots of kids that I've recommended it as a part-time tool for more recently in my career, like in the last few years, because of that specifically. Like, I'm like, but if I could visually give you options, could you access more? And a lot of times they can.
Yes. And I feel has been really good with getting parent buy-in. I explain it as just that. I'm like, listen, this is just a tool that will help your child. And we're essentially pairing visual information with the word. So like it's, taking things that are maybe a little bit more abstract and making them more concrete, like on and off. Like there's a picture of a light bulb. So it can really help your child like understand those concepts a little bit better. So when I explain it in that way, I feel like that has really helped with buy-in.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think using the term tool or support is just, it's the route I've gone for a few years now, just because that's what it is. It's a tool to support. And for some people, it will be their voice permanently. And that's fine. And that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people, it'll be their part-time tool. Like there's just so much varying spectrums of it, but we all use tools on a regular basis to help us access the world. I don't see why people won't just use AAC with other people.
Right, right.
I just had this conversation the other day. It was like, there's still so much bad information out there about AAC, because I've heard stories like the one you just shared where the other team member was like, nope, we can't do that. They already have access to verbal language. And it's like, well, what's the matter? Like they could get access to visual language too and show us even more and share even more with us.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to say, like, I love that you also admitted to like your own mistakes, because like with the grid size, because that just makes me feel like better as a clinician. And it's such a good point that like, even though, we've been doing this for how many years have you been in SLP? Like
I'm like over 9, almost 10. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's just such a good reminder that we can be doing this for 5-10 years. And like, we still like, it's a learning journey.
Yeah.
It's a learning journey for sure.
And that's such an important piece. And I do not shy away from telling you guys that I do mess up. Like I'm not imperfect. I don't think any of us are. And there will always be times and situations where I go to recommend something and maybe it's not right. But that's the whole point of like a trial process and that reflection piece that you brought up earlier. I reflect really quickly after a session or even during a session, and I'm like, "Ooh, I am off. we got to go a different direction."
Yes,
that's important. I think everybody should kind of try to add more of that into into their practice for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So with floor time and utilizing kind of this idea of building affect with your clients and building that connection and looking at those individual differences, I know in your role you do coach parents. So how does that look? What are you able to coach them on so that they can carry over those types of things at home?
So I touch base a little bit on like what floor time is and how it is different from compliance-based approaches that are typically recommended to all of our autistic kids, right?
Yep.
And I want parents to feel like they don't need any sort of like additional toy or tool that they have to buy. I want them to understand that like they are the best tool for their child, and like really place an emphasis on that R piece too, like that relationship. Like make sure that you're building a connection with your child. Make sure that you're giving yourself the time and the space to enjoy your child, even though like it's so stressful that like, you know, yeah, they may not be speaking, but like look at all the other ways that they are communicating to us.
Yeah.
And to just take every small thing as like a big win. Like even because a lot of times like a parent will text me or say something to me and they'll say like, I know it's not a big deal, but so and so did this. And I'm like, no, like that's a huge deal. Like please like take a moment to celebrate that.
Yeah.
And also like with, you know, our role as SLPs, a big part of the coaching goes back to describing AAC as a tool, as a support. It's not like, okay, this is it, and we're going to stop, you know, working on oral speech completely. Like, here's the iPad. Like, no, like it's just another form of communication that could potentially be helpful.
Yeah. I find so much importance in that relationship piece because I've had several new clients come in the last few months, and several of them have shared how like defeating it is to be in the medical model and get a diagnosis and get all these evals, and how you almost get like knocked down a few pegs, for lack of a better way to put it.
For sure.
It's hard to hear. It's hard to listen to a report that says, your kid is not good at all of these things. And as a parent, you're like, but they're wonderful and I love them. And I think it's so important that you're able to take that relationship piece and say, this is the focus. Like, take the time to build this, and then we'll build the communication on top of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Makes my heart happy. I
know.
I so want this world to be able to appreciate that there are differences in people. And yes, some of those differences are hard, and we do need to acknowledge that they're hard, and they're not like, oh, it's amazing that you have sensory differences. Like, there are going to be pieces that are difficult, but we have to do a better job as a field, as a community, as a society, of allowing excitement around some of these things too, and allowing us to really just appreciate our kids for who they are and all that they are.
Yeah.
And providing the supports. That doesn't mean like ignore the supports, just say, oh, they are who they are, giving the supports, but giving parents a little more hope and reassurance and comfort, rather than like the cold, they'll never talk and they'll never do this and they'll never do that. That's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah. I know parents are just given so much information, especially like right after their child gets diagnosed with autism too. It's just like part of my coaching too involves me saying to parents like, hey, like just because the doctor said you needed 20 to 40 hours of therapy after school, that doesn't mean that you have to, you know, go through with that.
Yeah.
So that goes back to the R too of like the relationship, like find the therapist that your child connects with. And if it's not a good fit, like you don't have to do 20 plus hours of therapy with that therapist.
Yes. Oh, I think that's so important. And I hope all the parents listen to that one more time, because you, like, as a parent, you are the consumer. You choose what happens, and absolutely take into account professional suggestions, because there is a lot of validity to some of them. But like you said, just because they say 20 hours after school doesn't mean you have to do it.
Yeah.
Think about that. Oh, that makes me exhausted.
Right? I'm like, so when do you have time for like bath time, bedtime? Like what?
When do you have time to go to gymnastics or go to the park, have dinner as a family?
Dinner, that's important.
Yes. Yeah. And I had a conversation, I think it's going to air right before yours, but the mom specifically mentioned that she was doing everything. She was doing everything that was recommended, and she was burnt out and her kid was burnt out. And then when they stopped, that relationship was really able to form and everybody was able to like re-regulate. And they kept the important things. It's not like they stopped cold turkey and did nothing. It just was, it was a regulating and comforting time for them to be able to kind of get back to them as a family.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Okay, so let's start wrapping up a little bit. Any words of wisdom for SLPs or professionals, parents out there who are kind of trying to move more towards a DIR floor time? Obviously, there's a certificate that you can take, and that course will tell you lots. Are there any things that people can do to kind of start adapting towards this method without necessarily taking the course?
Yeah, so ICDL offers, I believe, a lot of free trainings just for parents.
Awesome.
Too, that are just like interested in, learning a little bit more about the framework as opposed to, other approaches that may not be the best fits.
Okay.
And for SLPs and professionals, I would say to really just start paying attention to what your child's individual differences are and like think about how you could tailor your interactions based on each of those individual differences.
Okay.
And also like, the best time to start is like your next session. Like, it's not like, oh, but I need to finish like all of these certification courses first before I can like, really implement this method. Not at all. I mean, ICDL has like so many trainings. There's like the intro and then there's like the basic course, the proficient, the advanced, and the expert. Like I myself have only finished the basic course. Like I am like, I'm right alongside so many other professionals who are just really beginning to learn more about this framework and starting to implement it. It's not like I need to spend thousands of dollars on this training and then like go for it. Like, no, you can just start at your very next session.
Yeah. Love it. And we will make sure we put the link for their website and their trainings in the show notes so people can find it.
Yeah. Awesome.
How can people follow along with you? I know you're on social. So if people want to learn more from Nikki, where do they go?
Yes, sure. So my Instagram is at Schultz Speech Therapy. Schultz is SCHULTZ.
Awesome. And we will put that in the show notes too, just in case you don't want to rewind to remember how to spell it.
Great.
Nikki, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this chat and how much this framework really can support so much of this AAC piece from a very foundational component.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was great. This was so fun.
Absolutely. I hope you all enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Nikki gave some really great examples of how using that DIR floor time framework has really helped support her and her AAC use. And I love the stories that she was able to share with us. My take action step this week is really to look at those individual differences that she talked about. What individual differences make up your client that you're working with, your child that you're working with, and how can we use those to better support our AAC decision-making and our communication support as a whole. Like I mentioned in the middle of the episode, the handout for today's Take Action podcast resource library will be all related to that and allow you to kind of dig a little bit deeper into those pieces and kind of create a handout specifically so you can put your information in for those kids. So we will start there. I really, really love hearing different frameworks and how we can take bits and pieces of them and really make them this very holistic approach for each individual child that we are working with. So thank you again for joining us this week, and we will see you next week on the Take Action Podcast.